Um, I think I will start because I felt I've been inviting my colleagues here a bit to an adventure that I don't even know myself where I'm kind of going, but it's really nice, and I'm very thankful to Jill Friedman and Stephen that they've been kind of making this happening for us as well. So we are not in London, and we are in the UK, even though my accent doesn't really shows or makes it clear. But I'm going to introduce my colleagues here, that they're all English, and only me, who I am from Catalonia in Spain. I know that there's been an invitation to speak in any other language, and I've been saving a little poem for the end, if possible. So you can hear me speaking in Catalan, but I will not do that for the whole thing. We've decided to have a conversation, really, and in the way we thought to do it is that Vicky and myself, who I'm introducing in a minute, will be listening as outsider witness of Judy and Nick and Lucy in their conversation, and then we will have a conversation about their conversation, and at the end maybe join together. So the connection is, I have a connection with all of them, and then they have a different kind of yesterday's connection kind of thing. And I would kind of want to say that Vicky and I work together with both psychologists in the north of England. I am in the south of Manchester living at the moment, and Vicky is in Chester, not far away from me. And we were connected through the collective narrative therapy practices. David Denborough somehow introduced us some years ago, and we created a bit of a support for each other. We did a web page, and we've been doing some work and together. This is my connection with Vicky, that she will introduce herself in a minute. Then my connection with Judy is through our training in family therapy, and our first time, she will tell us, the first time we met was to a conference that David Epson organized in Ireland. So this is my other narrative connection with Judy. And my narrative connection with Lucy is that we both joined a monthly supervision with Hugh Fox in Manchester. And she's also a psychologist, and we had supervision this week, and that was the connection. And Nick and myself, we've been working in a project of podcasts. I think I will put the link in the chat, so if people want to go and have a look at that. So in this podcast, we try to do narrative questions, and Nick has been interested in that, even though she's more like from a journalist point of view than from a therapy point of view. So I think I'm going to give the voice to Vicky if she wants to kind of say a bit more before we let Lucy, Nick, and Judy introduce themselves and have a conversation in front of us.
Yes, okay. So yeah, I'm Vicky Eames. Thank you very much, Marangels, for involving me in this project. I'm really looking forward to hearing the conversation that develops today, and you know, to be able to listen carefully to that in the sort of using the outsider witness kind of format. And just to say, yes, I've been working with Marangels, probably it must be 6-7 years, I'm not sure, since we first started working together and have the shared interest in narrative, so she's often getting me involved in interesting projects, so yeah, I'm very grateful for this one.
So as we thought we do it, it would be nice if the three of you join in a conversation. Vicky and I, we will try to listen carefully and take some notes of your words and the things that catch our attention, to then, I don't know, after 20 minutes or so, whatever feels natural, we respond, and then you can hear maybe come back to our responses as well. Does this sound okay? Yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess we're all really new in terms of relationships. I've been listening to some of the other podcasts, and they've been talking about the history of their relationships, and we just sort of met yesterday, the three of us. So it's a very short history. But, history. But and I guess one of the things that we were sort of thinking about was what it sort of means to be living in these strange times. And we had started to share some experiences of that. I wonder whether one of the other sort of themes that came up in one of the other podcasts was about metaphors, and thinking about our conversation yesterday and metaphors, and this sort of period, this sort of global pandemic period. I suppose what came to my mind as a metaphor was that of a swamp. And I sort of looked up the definition of a swamp, which says something about an expanse of wet, spongy land, which has some growth of vegetation on it, but it wasn't fit for consultation. And swampy means to overwhelm with something, overwhelm with an excess of something. And I was thinking, for me, that would be uncertainty at this time. So being connected in a conversation at a time of uncertainty on a rather swampy land would been looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I think I could think of a lot of metaphors for my experience so far. Swamps, I like the one of swamp because there's so much uncertainty around, and we touched on that yesterday, and I think Mary-Angels was talking about that particularly. Should I just say a bit about my experience, and then so Mary-Angels invited me after Thursday's our narrative meeting, and I talked in that meeting about my experiences of having COVID in this time. So I got COVID about 7 weeks ago, and have had a real find it hard to find words to describe the experience, really. So a roller coaster, or a game of snakes and ladders is what the metaphor that somebody used in an article that I'd read. So what I mean by that is had a really difficult time with it, with lots of symptoms, and then quite quickly seemed to be getting better, and then started to enter another phase of it, feeling ill in different ways, and then the next day feeling completely better again. So I'm thinking of, actually, because I work in physical health, I'm thinking of some narratives of illness that I've read about, and people talking about COVID as a flu-like illness, and the kind of trajectory of that would be that you're very ill and then you gradually get better and better and better. And my experience hasn't fit with that in any way. And I'm still getting some symptoms, but I'm not as bad as I have been. So the journey's still on for me, at the moment. But what's interesting about my experience that I'm particularly interested in, so I was thinking about, what do I want to say, and during the time of having COVID, and particularly when I was most ill, and my partner had it at the same time, so we'd have all sorts of conversations about the kind of ideas that are out there and the stories that are told about having COVID, and our experience just hasn't really fit with those stories. In lots of different ways they haven't fit, and I could say more about that. I just don't want to take over the conversation with my experience, really, but I could say a couple of bits about how it hasn't fit, and then see what comes from that. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
So there's something on the news yesterday that made me think about our experience of two parents having COVID with two small children at the same time, and how we struggled so much trying to look after them, because in any other situation probably both of us wouldn't be ill at the same time, and if we would be able to ask parents or friends to help out. So it's a very unique situation. And I was thinking yesterday about our experience of trying to get shopping online and trying to book a shopping slot and not being classed as vulnerable. So shopping slots were only available for people who were vulnerable. And we were saying, well, we've never felt more vulnerable. We can't get shopping, and we've got 2 young children that we can barely look after at the moment. And so our experience of, we were kind of told that we're not vulnerable, really. That was the sort of feedback. And then at a point, another experience of not quite fitting in with the narrative about COVID and the illness was the symptoms. So you're told about the temperature and the cough, and now the loss of taste and smell, and we didn't have any of those. I had a lot of problems with breathing, and I won't go into lots of detail, but I had some scary symptoms. But because I didn't have a cough or a temperature, when I tried to get help with that, so calling 111, I was told that I was talking to the wrong people because this is the COVID helpline, and if I haven't got those symptoms, then I haven't got COVID. So I find it really hard to get any help when we did decide to call the GP. And sort of feeling, just, I suppose the metaphor and the feeling is being out of step and being in a bit of a bubble where we're told there's lots of narratives about how you're supposed to experience it, and we weren't fitting in with those. And again, now with the children going back to school, we're thinking of not sending our children back to school for a while. But there's not many people in our cohort who aren't doing that. So again, we're questioning that, and we stand out a bit, and we're not kind of fitting in. So my experiences of having COVID, I suppose, I wonder how many people out there are also struggling and feeling alone in a bit of a bubble. And I haven't heard any stories of 2 parents having COVID and struggling to look after their children. And it just came up on the news yesterday because a very significant MP was he's in trouble for I'm sure you've all heard the story, but he travelled to his parents because he said that his child needed looking after while they both had symptoms of COVID. And I mean, I don't know how he drove 250 miles, but we couldn't have done that. But it was the first time that I'd heard that narrative of how do you look after your children. So sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but my what I'm interested in, I suppose, is not as having experiences outside of the told experiences, that what you hear when you listen to the radio, and that's what's interesting to me. Yeah. Sorry, I said a lot then.
It's really interesting because I was kind of writing. I actually haven't got a pen, so I'm actually using my phone. I've just looked around my desk and there's no pen on the entire desk. It's really interesting. I heard you say the words like vulnerable and standing out, and I'm having a completely parallel experience to that, because before COVID and the whole of my life, I've spent my whole life fighting against that term vulnerable. I have a genetic condition, which is a disability, which is very visible, and 3 members of our family have it. So we draw quite a lot of attention when we go out anywhere or when we're in public, which I have leaned into the whole of my life, and I've never hidden away from, because I found it very empowering to make sure that I don't stay inside and not be seen. So, and I teach my daughters that same thing. You need to be seen, and we need to be out there, and we need to kind of show diversity, and we need to show that we fit in, and that we're not vulnerable, and that we can do the same as everybody else. So I've spent a lot of energy, I'm 42, doing this all of my life at different stages. And as a mother, I'm passing that on to my children, rightly or wrongly. And with all of my jobs, I worked at the BBC as a journalist, and that was very public and very seen, constantly meeting new people. I'm now a teacher, so I constantly, again, am being seen, and I kind of make sure that happens. And actually, not being able to go out and be seen has actually been really strangely freeing for me, because I've not had to make that decision myself. I've just been forced to kind of take some time, just the 4 of us at home, not be on or too much, you know, not kind of be seen or feel I need to be heard or fight for something, fight for access or fight for kind of, you know, to be seen as equal to everybody else, whether that's in the school playground or whether that's at work or whether that's in the supermarket, where I know you were saying, Lucy, about, you know, not fitting into that vulnerable category. So I've purposely never really done online shopping because strangely I've forced myself to go to supermarkets and interact with everybody else. And now it's great because I can do a little bit of that. And it's just interesting that I've had kind of almost a parallel experience, which I don't think should last forever, and I don't want it to last forever. And I think it's time to go back into the world and start that again and start to be seen and start. And I think it's really important, not just for me, but for kind of society, that we're all out there looking different and being different. But I've enjoyed the rest and I've enjoyed the kind of privacy and not being public. I've really enjoyed that and the lack of external pressure. It's been good for me, and I hope that I can remember that and take that away. And even if that just means taking a day every month just to do that, or I think it's important. But I absolutely empathize with what you're feeling now, because that's kind of what I probably feel 90% of the time in ordinary life.
There's a couple of things that resonate for me in that. It sounds almost like your experience, Nick, of being visible is sort of almost like a campaign. It makes me think of sort of John Burnham's work on sort of visible, invisible, voiced and unvoiced experiences. But the thing that sort of resonates for me, Lucy, with your conversation, the idea of not fitting with a dominant narrative, and almost somehow an idea of almost not being deserving if you're not somehow the official vulnerable. Made me think about Kata Weingarten's work on illness narratives, and I became familiar with those when my husband was diagnosed with motor neurone disease in 2004. And they really sort of kept us afloat a bit, insofar as she talks about the different types of illness narratives, the stability narrative that you can tell if your illness is sort of on a level, basically. The illness progressive narrative that you can tell if you're poorly but you're going to get better, and a regressive narrative that you can tell if can only tell if you have, like my husband did, a terminal illness. And it really made sense that what she was saying is that you can you know, the narrative you have to tell depends on sort of maybe the audiences you can recruit to it. Because actually it's really difficult to be the one telling the narrative that people don't really want to hear, or don't really know how to respond to, or doesn't sort of fit very easily. And the roller coaster metaphor certainly fitted for us in that experience. And we had to work really hard at finding ways of being in communication with people that didn't leave us feeling alienated. Because you had sort of choices of if people asked, how are you? You had to make a choice depending on sort of the listening space, if you will, on do you say how you really feel and risk alienating people, or do you give a version that you think they might want to hear and then feel sort of a bit alienated from your own experience? So all sorts of different sort of decision making goes on in trying to relate to people if your story is a bit out of step.
Yeah, and I can totally identify with that. And it has all sorts of effects, I think, in all sorts of ways, if your story doesn't fit. So one of the effects, I assumed that one of my symptoms was a panic attack. I've never experienced panic attacks in my life, but I thought, oh, this is my first panic attack. And I think even my partner, who was going through the same thing, pretty much identical symptoms at the same time, we kept telling ourselves it was maybe psychological, and it was and then I think just sharing bits with my friends, and a couple of friends were saying perhaps it's psychological, some of your symptoms. And when I read this article it was a professor at Liverpool University in virology who'd had a very similar experience over about 8 weeks of having COVID and having scary symptoms and then waking up the next day and feeling perfectly well. It's hard to explain that to anyone. It doesn't make sense. So when I felt perfectly well, I thought, okay, I can go back to work now. I'll start booking people in. So I booked people in for work in 2 weeks' time, thinking, well, I'll of course be well by then. And then 2 weeks' time, I wasn't well and have to cancel them. And so my manager was basically saying, are you better or you're not better? Are you well or are you ill? You're either off sick or you're well. And so this trajectory of our illness just hasn't fitted in any way that society functions. The NHS, the whole sick scheme about being off sick, it doesn't fit. And I suppose I feel like I should speak out about those things and say to managers that this is a very different type of illness, and it needs managing in lots of different ways, and it needs managing in a different way. I think, yeah, and I feel like the more time goes on, perhaps more stories will be told about it, which will help lots of people. And I think you were saying, Judy, about being in conversation with people who can listen and who the conversation can have a positive effect. And one of the most important people who's got us through the whole thing was a mother from school. I didn't really know her at all, really, not very well, but she happens to be a nurse and had COVID before us, so she was in contact with us pretty much every day, and it really got us through. And I wasn't scared to talk about symptoms because she'd been through it, and I didn't feel like I would worry her. And she was very helpful on the nursing front. And so having people who you feel that you can have those conversations with is an absolute lifesaver, really, for us. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, because I think when you've got like a rare condition or disease, or however you want to call it, you immediately look for your kind of tribe, for people that have been through a similar thing. And I do that since I look for other people that have dwarfism or have achondroplasia, and I call it my community. I've got my community now, I'm kind of safe, and everybody's going to think like me, and everybody's going to approach life the same as me, and everybody's going to have the same lived experience of that condition. And then I still do this, I still have this illusion, and then I quickly am reminded that that's not actually the case. And just like you were saying, Lucy, there's quite a lot of people that are going through the same thing, but in completely different ways. And that dominant narrative of that kind of exists. And it's quite exhausting to say, I'm not going through that. I need to tell somebody that that's not my experience of that condition or that, disease. And I need to kind of speak up and say, mine's in slightly different, but sometimes people don't want to hear that, which is really interesting, because I think they feel that it threatens their experience, or it kind of makes their voice quieter, and they want their voice to be louder. And actually what that makes you feel is more lonely. And I've definitely found that whilst I thought connecting with people going through the same experience as me was going to make me feel supported, I've actually often not. I've actually felt more lonely, and I've found that support in a different way through people that are actually not in that so-called community or not having that same experience. So I think that's really interesting. I really picked up on that when you're talking about that.
Yeah. I think the connections can come about in unusual ways, can't they? When I was feeling sort of very lost and adrift at the beginning of COVID, and very panicky, before sort of really realizing that the sort of anticipatory grief I was experiencing around COVID was actually resonating very strongly around living with motor neurone disease. And sort of it was helpful to recognize that and to name it. And I was having a conversation with my work supervisor actually, and was just sort of telling her about how I was watching a wren build a nest in a a disused hanging basket in my garden. And she had listened to me talk about how I sort of felt lost and panicky. And in the talk of the wren, she said, "Oh, I've got a book that you might like." And it looked like it was just an ordinary book about somebody's written about birds, and it's by Kyo MacLear, called Birds, Art, Life and Death. But the bit on the front of the book says, the art of noticing the small and significant. And I just sort of thought like, wow, that's a really, again, the birds are a connection for me with my husband, but also a connection with Kata's writing around a small and not trivial. So it's weird how those connections happen, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, and I feel like I quite often feel like I want to write something or say something about these experiences, but wonder where to start really. And it's particularly poignant at the moment, just looking at the threads of conversations that are going on with the school that my children go to, and the narratives about the illness, they're becoming quite divisive. So there's parents who want to send their children back and feel confident about that, and then there's parents who don't feel confident and are quite frightened about doing that, and then so there's these threads of conversations, and my response, one of the conversations, one of the mothers had said something about it, if you do get it, it's just a few days in bed with paracetamol, and it had such a powerful effect. I'm wanting to say, no, don't mess about with this. It's not a few days in bed. It wasn't for us. But without wanting to say too much, because I don't want to force my experiences on somebody else who doesn't want to hear it. And also it becomes entering into a divisive conversation about for and against. So you're right or you're wrong. So are you right or wrong to send your children back to school or not to send your children back to school? And it makes me a bit sad that these conversations are becoming like you're on one side or the other. And it makes me want to say something or write something, or, about, we all have our different experiences, don't we? And they're all valid and they're so different. And, but yeah, putting pen to paper is tricky. It's messy, and these experiences are messy and tricky, and yeah.
Thank you, all of you. Do you think that's a good point for maybe Vicky and I respond to your...
Yeah.
Thank you. I have some ideas. Have you heard some interesting ideas connecting with you, Vicky?
Yeah, lots of interesting ideas. I was sort of, trying to, there's lots of overlapping themes between the different stories, and I particularly, initially I kind of was listening out for when Judy was talking about the swamp metaphor, and one of the dictionary definitions had been some growth of vegetation, and I was thinking, okay, in the swamp, what are the growths of vegetation? And then later when she spoke about the wren building the nest in the hanging basket and the art of noticing the small and insignificant, the book, and I just thought, for me, that was the growth of vegetation that I was kind of listening out for. I really liked that story that Judy told.
I know that you like birds too, Vicky. Birds is something special to you, so I'm not surprised that was catching your attention.
The baby bird in my garden I found.
So I just wonder what kind of maybe an image that evoked on you this kind of birth story, or this part of the story?
I suppose it was more the image of Judy kind of, you know, feeling, I'm just trying to remember what she was saying. She was feeling on my bits. Yeah, I mean, talking about that anticipatory grief and talking with her friend, and so I'm just visualising her sort of looking out the window and feeling, you know, this sense of grief, but then sort of seeing the wren, looking out the window and seeing the wren. So that's the sort of image I have of Judy sat in her, wherever she sits. I had imagined it being a sort of bit of a garden seat, but maybe it's not, but that was what kind of came to mind.
And how do you think this connects with you, or in this moment in time as well? How would you say that connects with you now?
Well, I guess because I'm my room where I'm sitting, so maybe I've got some sort of windows out onto the garden, and there was a sort of little robin's nest recently and some baby robins, so I kind of just in that very concrete way kind of connected with that idea of sort of looking out the window while you're working. You know, we're so sort of stuck indoors that you know, windows have been so important on so many different levels. You know, there's like the in the videos that we see of people, the little windows into their lives, and then, you know, what we see looking out of our windows each day, you know, particularly when, you know, the lockdown was stricter, and so I just sort of, and I think also just that idea of, you know, I suppose connecting it with the absent but implicit, of kind of trying to notice that the small things, I think the small and insignificant things, I think to use the book, The Art of Noticing the Small and Insignificant, I kind of really liked that idea, and you know, would like to be able to remember that myself, you know, day to day, when sometimes when you're feeling a bit stuck in, and like there's a lack of diversity in life day to day, you know, in terms of experience.
I thought for me it was almost a combination between what Lucy and Nick were saying in this connection between what it is to feel that you don't fit, or that your story doesn't fit with the majority of the narrative, and how do you manage that, and how you incredibly surprisingly you feel free in a moment where the majority of people are in a lockdown, and I don't know, I don't have an image with that, but it really connected with my story of being a foreigner living in another country, even though I've been here almost 21 years now. There are these little things that are very interesting, that they're difficult to share, that they are almost invisible. And I sometimes, after the years, you forget that those things are important. And maybe I notice then when I go on holidays to my hometown, or when I have conversations with people that they just arrive to visit the country or live as a newcomers here. And so I don't know, I really connected with these small things that might be invisible for the rest of the world, but that makes my narrative not fitting with the majority of the narrative of other people. And how I feel energized in different moments where it doesn't fit with the rest of the world too. So I don't know, I was enjoying hearing that and thinking about that in this other level, which is not connected to the COVID-19 necessarily. I remember when we did one of the first podcasts we did with Nick, I hope you don't mind me saying that, I don't usually wear high heels, but that day I had some high heels. And then I was very conscious of going with Nick and having a sense that I'm a tall woman in general. So with my high heels, it felt a bit being a bit more taller. And so when I was hearing you, how you feel free now that you don't need to give explanations of that, I thought, you know, even though I needed to say that to you at some point, you know, oh, I don't know, I need to kind of also rethink the way I walk around you or be with you, because you are challenging me as well in many ways, and it's a nice challenge. Well, it made me think how you were saying that now, that it feels free not to be able to have to give explanations all the time of things, or to fight your corner, or to demonstrate things, which it came with this sense of an energy that you need to put, and it's nice to know that you don't need to put this energy now.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Is that idea of kind of being seen versus privacy, you know, resonated with me, because, but I kind of think it's like being seen in different ways. So people are, you're being seen in your home environment online, and we're seeing the homes of lots of different people we would never normally see. And obviously some people are more private about that than others, or more it's more staged, or sometimes it's kind of, you know, you get a little glimpse of you know, an aspect of them and their kind of personality, or their kind of ways of living. And so I think that's just a really interesting kind of question, really, about what it means to sort of be out in the world and seeing people, you know, in the world outside, versus people getting glimpses into our homes.
Am I allowed to say something, or should I wait to the end? I was going to say, I just think that line between private and public is something that we're all absolutely experiencing now, and I think it's about kind of, it's great to be public and be out there, or let your home be seen, but it's about keeping a part of yourself still, isn't it? And it's remembering that part of yourself and being authentic to that. I think that's really something that I want to remember moving forward, that I don't think that I'm going to staying in, not being seen, because I won't be able to. So I think, you know, I'm conditioned that I will continue to do that, but I want to remember to keep a part of myself that is private, that I don't have to show to everybody else.
Which is really, really interesting, because in contrast again with the story of Lucy, when we were in that supervision on Thursday, Lucy explained a bit of the story, and I remember she was saying very much that it's, you know, she's not sharing that very often, and hearing Lucy saying today, I might write this, I might tell the story. I think her words are, I think I need to, or I should speak up to managers. So it's really, I've been thinking how the power of sharing the story, even 2 or 3 times to a public place, how can give, I don't know, I felt like seeing like a bird, maybe opening the wings and flying in a different level, which is making public something that felt very private, probably very recently, but that sometimes it makes a difference to yourself, but to other people, to listen the different stories.
That idea that I think Lucy was talking about sort of challenging that sort of dichotomy, you know, the well versus sick, just the idea that people kind of have to fit into sort of certain boxes, and her sort of, exploring how she might do that in a way that doesn't invite more dichotomy or divisiveness, I think was the, you know, the word she was using. And so I was really kind of curious to think how we might do that, really. And you know, then Judy talking about the idea of you know, making a choice based on the listening space. I kind of really like that idea of a listening space, and you know, how do you kind of how do you create a listening space, you know, through the way that we share our stories, and it felt like that it was really important to have created those kind of spaces. So Lucy talked about the nurse mum from school, who had kind of created a listening space for her, really, and that felt really important, that she'd, you know, had that listening space during the time when she was feeling really, you know, confused and, you know, and kind of separate from everybody.
When I hear you telling that again, Vicky, it's retelling in a way. It takes me again to my story of being a foreigner, and how many times you know, you go with your own ways of understanding things, and you think the listening space is similar. So I don't know, very kind of one thing that happened still to me is like, well, a little bit less, like in the UK, when people say, how are you? People expect you to say, okay, and move on. In Spain or in Catalonia, when people say, how are you? They spend to be 20 minutes talking about how you are and tell your story. And now it took me ages to kind of not say how I really am, because it's not the moment or the point. This is not the moment and the audience. So it also made me think about, I think I would take from hearing this, being in this conversation, how we go into the balance of pushing a little bit the boundaries of being different, and maybe sharing a little bit more and being okay about that, and also maybe taking care of myself in terms of who is the audience and how I want to, how I want to go into these conversations with other people.
It's sort of, that's just resonated with me on a completely different level, of something that maybe I can, I suppose some of the experiences of living in lockdown for a long time with, you know, with your immediate family and kind of, it just made me think of a row that I had with my husband a few days ago, and neither of us have been willing to give one another a listening space ever since. So I kind of might take from that maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to kind of find that. So that's a
well. So you may take more than me from this conversation, or Robin.
That'll work out.
Shall we give you boys again, Lucy, Nick, and Judy, so you have a bit of moment? And I really thank you for all the things you've been sharing.
I think the word that really struck with me was authentic, and thinking about Lucy's sort of very current experience, Nick's sort of life experience, and my historical experience of how to live authentically or speak authentically is really, really sort of struck me. And how I would encourage Lucy to write, because that's what I did in that situation. That's and being inspired by Katie's works, that we wrote about it. And I don't know if you would mind me just saying something very briefly about what my husband said in that interview, in that paper we wrote together. He wrote, so this is my husband Jim. He said, motor neurone disease makes me dependent in many ways, and when people describe me as brave or stoic, it can reinforce the idea that I am passive. What keeps us afloat is have someone understand the impact of motor neurone disease and then help us to see beyond the symptoms, to recognize that it is still important to me to be able to contribute. And while my body is paralyzed, and I am in fact working hard for this purpose, not just by thinking practically about aids and adaptations, but mainly by finding ways to sustain my relationships and buoy up my morale. And there's something in that, I think, for me, about how we find skills of living with uncertainty, how we make active contributions and protests even that run against those narratives that we need to be brave and heroic.
Because it's so easy to get, sorry. It's just so easy to get storied, isn't it, by other people? And I suppose that was really, I feel really really appreciated that you shared that, Judy. And I just feel like what it made me think of is finding spaces and safe spaces and spaces where you don't have to fit into what you're told that you're supposed to experience, and those spaces become so treasured and important. Yeah, and I suppose maybe one of the reasons that I said yes today to doing this quite last minute when Mariangela's asked me is I appreciated so much that space from the nurse who I didn't know very well, that I don't want anyone to be going through it without having that space. So I feel like the more people I tell that I've had it, at least maybe I could be that for someone else. Which is, I'm not trying to be like heroic or anything. But I so appreciated that space. That it's an interesting place to be as a therapist, because I did start to have conversations and then I'm back off sick again. As a therapist, I've never been in a situation where what is on everybody's mind is, and what everybody wants to talk about in a therapeutic space, is also something that I've been through or going through. That's never happened before. So it's an odd challenge in terms of how much you share and how much you don't share. And it's really interesting. It's going to be an interesting challenge. And I lean towards being as transparent as possible, really, about my own experiences, because I think sharing feels so important. And so that sounds like a very kind of broad thing, but when you were talking, Judy, I was thinking about small spaces, really, and niches and little corners where you can be who you are and not have to be brave or be whatever you're supposed to be when you're going through illness. You know.
I really picked up on the brave, that kind of language as well. Thanks, Judy, for sharing that with us. I think the words brave, it's really interesting. People like to put their own narrative onto your experience to make themselves feel better. And often people like to find the brave, or there's a fantastic TED talk by a woman who sadly passed away now called Stella Young from Australia. And it's, I'm not your inspirational porn, which I just love as a saying as well. But I just think that kind of, it's, you know, the idea that if you see somebody with a condition or a disability or going through an experience, you want to kind of make them heroic and brave to, I'll give them an award for some kind for just living. And it's often to make yourself feel better, or make, particularly in the media, we see these stories often portrayed, and particularly during COVID, you know, the survival stories or the experience of somebody that's kind of that triumph over tragedy. And I think it's really interesting because that's not the narrative that always needs to be told, and it's not the person that's going through that feels any of those words. She particularly references that they were going to give her an award just for going to school. And, you know, and she was, you know, and it's kind of, well, I go to school, and her parents are like, well, she's just going to school, she doesn't need an award for that, you know. And I think it's about those small things that people kind of want to see about you, that think that it makes them feel better about their own narrative. And it's holding on again to your own experience, and also telling your own story and being brave enough to tell it, because it doesn't always fit in to what people want to hear. And Mariangela's has really taught me that doing the podcast, because I live often off adrenaline, particularly in the podcast, because I feel this sense of responsibility that if there's a silence, I have to fill that silence, or if there's a moment where we run out of things to say, then it's all going to be, everyone's going to be looking at me to fill that. And Mariangela's has taught me how to listen to the people that are not necessarily talking the loudest, or the people that don't have that dominant narrative, and to go to them first. And it's something that I'm really trying to do more of, because I'm not an expert. People might think because I'm saying I want it for myself that I'd be an expert in it, but I'm not, and I need to learn how to listen better.
Thank you, all of you. I'm aware of the time, which is we are using the 11 hour in the 11 hour really in our country, which is interesting to position ourselves in the center of the universe somehow. Made me think when I saw that the 11 hour of this beautiful storytelling happens to be at 11 in the UK. So we're almost at the end, and I just wonder, Vicky and everybody, Steve, if it's still okay for me to share a bit of a poem in Catalan. So yeah. I just decided to copy and paste the poem in English. I don't think it's the whole poem, and I can put it here in the chat. Sorry, I think I had something else, but the web page of the other thing. But anyway, this is the Ithaca. Probably some of you are familiar with this poem. It's not a Catalan poem. It's a Greek poem from Constantin Cavafy, but I learned that poem in Catalan through the words of a Catalan gay activist, singer-songwriter in the times of Franco in Spain, where I was born in that time. That's how old I am, and it stayed with me always in terms of activism and journeys. So I'm going to read a little bit of this poem in Catalan, so you can hear how I sound when I speak my own language. And it says like that: Ítaca. Quan surts per fer el viatge cap a Ítaca, has de pregar que el camí sigui llarg, ple d'aventures, ple de coneixences. Has de pregar que el camí sigui llarg, que siguin moltes les matinades que entraràs en un port que els teus ulls ignoraven. I vagis a ciutats per aprendre dels que saben. Tingues sempre al cor la idea d'Ítaca. Has d'arribar-hi. És el teu destí. Però no forcis gens la travessia. És preferible que duri molts anys. Que sigui vell quan fundegis l'illa. Ric de tot el que t'hauràs guanyat fent el camí. Sense esperar que et doni més riqueses. Ítaca t'ha donat el vell viatge. Sense ella no hauria sortit. So that's the end of it.
Very beautiful in Catalan.
Really beautiful, thank you.
What does that mean to you, Mary-Angels, that poem?
It is a poem. Thank you, Judy. You always have so beautiful questions. It is a journey, and it says that you are looking forward to go somewhere, but when you arrive there, you might feel deceived because somewhere where you arrive there are other things. And I think my life has been a bit like that, trying to, I don't know, finish my training in narrative therapy, thinking when I arrive there, and then you arrive there, and it's not the arriving there. It may be so many things that I have been getting in the way there that I need to learn to appreciate. So it's been in my life, I think. I don't know whether it's because I heard that poem before that has been inspiring me to live my life in this way, or the other way around.
Well, I appreciate you inviting us into this conversation. I think I would say my relationship with you has been a very sustaining one at this time. Your creativity and the connection that you and Vicky reach out to people, I think, has been really sort of valuable, and I've appreciated that very much. And it's been really nice to meet and connect up with Lucy and Nick. Thank you.
Yes, I really appreciate it too. I was really excited when when you asked me to join, and I just had a quick glance at the comments, the chat down the side of my screen. It just gave me goosebumps, really, just seeing that people are witnessing each other's stories, and this is just going around the world. I find pretty exciting, and yeah, I think it's a great thing that's happening, and I think they can only be good in putting stories out there, I think, and sharing stories. And so thank you for asking me, and thank you for everybody for witnessing our stories.
You're the same. Thank you so much. I love connecting, and I think connecting just even just us here, but then like you were saying, to see the comments down the side and think, gosh, this is connecting for everyone, not just our conversation, but the conversations that are happening in the next 24 hours. And I've actually been thinking, oh no, what if I don't see Judy and Lucy again? Like, what am I going, like everything, like what can we do to stay all connected? The 5 of us, which maybe could be lockdown, making me feel a little bit more emotional. But I think that it's so great to be able to connect, and that kind of sense of finding that when you are feeling the most vulnerable, finding connection, I think is the most important thing, to find then the courage to go and tell your story. And I think definitely those stories need to be told and heard.
Can I just say as well, thank you, Mary-Angels, for inviting me, and it's been really lovely to meet Lucy and Nick and Judy. And I particularly appreciate that poem, and because we are at the moment, it's like we're in a journey where we don't know when we will arrive or where we're going to or what will happen when we're there. And I suppose just to realise that actually that's a part of life that we've all lived before, that we've been through journeys where we've been sometimes surprised when we get somewhere that it's not what we expect, and so that for me gives me a bit of comfort at this time when we kind of don't know what the route out of this situation and what the world is going to be like on the other side. And there may be many wonderful things as well as some difficult things as well. So it gives me a bit of a sense of hope.
Thank you all.